Sights and sound in this off-year election, we have a new way to do it. It's essentially a combination of Fox News voter analysis, which is the rolling poll, and the exit polls of old. And we are tying together with the Associated Press and other networks as well to give us the best numbers, and that's the Fox News voter poll. And we're starting to get numbers. First polls close in Virginia at the top of the hour, and we'll be able to characterize that race at that time. Let's bring in our panel. Karl Rove, former Deputy Chief of Staff to President George W. Bush, Fox News Chief Legal Correspondent, anchor of Fox News Sunday, Shannon Bream, and Harold Ford Jr., former Tennessee Congressman, co-host of The Five. You know, we had a briefing on these numbers. Sandra Smith has been doing a number of these, Harold. As you look at some of this stuff coming out early, what do you see? How do you paint the night?
A couple of things stand out. First, affordability, cost of living remains the highest things on voters' minds all across the country, or at least in the 3 or 4 places we're talking about. 2, I think voters understand what's realistic and what's not if you look at some of the data. Even here in New York, where Mr. Mamdani's talked about his economic plan, which at the core of it seems to be reduced prices or just free things for people. People seem to be a little doubtful of that. And finally, President Trump's playing a little bit in these races, which is what Democrats hope for. I still think we're going to see a surprise in that, but we talked a little off here. I don't feel all of this is quite settled yet. The polls in New York don't close for another 2 hours. Yeah. We obviously will get the Virginia results here shortly, but this is what this country is about, and I hope we don't discourage anyone from going to vote. People should get out and vote if they still have an opportunity in their locales or their states or their cities to be able to do that.
And clearly, in some of these races, Shannon, that could make a difference. A late surge. New York has seen the highest voter turnout for a mayor's election in 20 years. That was as of late this afternoon. Here is the Senate Minority Leader asked specifically today why he didn't endorse and how he ended up voting. This was the question to Chuck Schumer.
Today is election day in New York City. Did you vote for Mamdani or Cuomo?
Look, I voted, and I look forward to working with the next mayor to help New York City.
How crazy is that? That's the Senate Minority Leader who, you know, is from New York and could have endorsed, didn't say how he voted.
Yeah, and arguably one of the most popular, powerful politicians here in New York. But it makes me flash back to that other big story we've all been covering for weeks, which is the shutdown. And remember in the spring, when he voted with some Republicans to keep the government going, keep it funded, he took enormous backlash from the progressive wing of his party. I think he's still smarting from that. And that may be factoring into whether or not he's willing to answer truthfully about who he is or isn't supporting or voting for here in New York, because of what happened with that action back in the spring.
It does tell you a lot about where the Democratic Party is and how concerned they are about the left and the power on the left, right, Karl?
Yeah, absolutely. Think about this. This is a city where 66% of the registered active voters are Democrats. And there are going to be a large number of people like the senior senator from the state who are going to say, I'm not voting for. I was talking to a guy today who's a friend of mine here in New York, an active Democrat, and he cannot bring himself to vote for Mamdani. So he's probably going to win, but the key number is not going to be his margin over Cuomo. It's going to be what is his number compared to the fact that 66% of the city are Democrats, 20% of them are independents, and the rest of them are Republicans, conservatives, and minor parties or declined a state.
You know, Abigail Spanberger in Virginia, Harold, seen as this candidate that going in was maybe going to run away with it. This is a little closer heading into Election Day. We'll see what it ends up being at the top of the hour here, what we can characterize the race. But the government shutdown could play a factor in Virginia with as many government workers as there are in Northern Virginia in particular.
It could cut both ways. You know, one of the things we've seen in state and local races, I think far more so than you did 20 years ago, is the national politics plays an increasingly tough and can be a pernicious role depending on which side you come down on. There are probably but a handful of states, if that are more affected by the government shutdown in terms of workers in that state being impacted or relatives of those workers in a particular area being impacted. So I wouldn't be surprised at all. The poll I have not seen, and maybe Sandra put it up and I didn't see it, who do voters in Virginia blame most for the shutdown? If they blame whichever party they blame the most, that party running on the governor's thing would probably benefit. My thinking is I've seen some polling we put up on some of the other shows, including Another show I get to come on, Special Reports, and one I like coming on.
Well, thank you very much.
But we've seen that Republicans might be getting as much blame, if not a little more, than Democrats. But I hadn't seen a poll on who Virginians are blaming the most for that, which could give us a sense of how that may play in that race.
The other thing we're seeing, Shannon, is in New Jersey. It seems like Jack Ciattarelli was running hard to the finish line. He was a better candidate this time than he was in 21. Polls were tight heading into today, and it all really determines who comes out. President Trump is playing in that race, got a teletown hall. He really was active on Truth Social as well.
Yeah, and he had this closing moment, if you're paying attention at all, the reunion with his son in uniform. I mean, that's something that has gone viral, caught a lot of attention. But energy, affordability, property taxes, all those things are playing in New Jersey, along with these national issues as well. But he is somebody who continues to tell us that his internal polling is closer. He argues, and they're always going to argue that, than what the primary polls are telling you. I mean, having interviewed him, as we all have, he says he's really figured out this way that he's going to push back on Trump when he needs to, be independent when he needs to for the people of New Jersey. We'll see if they buy that argument.
I mean, this time he is a Trump candidate. Last time he was not when he ran in New Jersey, and maybe strategically that's what he was thinking. Then President Trump comes 6 points shy in 24 of winning New Jersey.
Yeah.
And now he accepts the endorsement and wholeheartedly campaigns with him.
Well, two things. One is New Jersey swung between 20 and 24. It's the second biggest swing in the country. Only New York is a bigger swing for Republicans. Trump lost the state by 16 in 2020, loses it by 6 last time around. And a lot of it is the non-white vote in northeastern New Jersey. But I think Ciattarelli is a terrific candidate. He's authentic. He's the everyman. He's not polished. He's what you see and what you get. Cheryl has been a terrible candidate, and I think he's brilliantly played the Trump card. He has said, I'm with the president when I agree with him, and we can work well together. But he's made it more about himself and what he wants to do for the future of New Jersey than just simply saying I'm with Trump.
The question will be what we read into the results tonight. Is it a canary in the coal mine? What does it tell us about 26? But we're going to have a lot to digest tonight. Thanks, panel.
Click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You won't get it anywhere else.